just wanted to make a follow-up video to yesterday's message video that I gave at Hope Community, where I was talking about the image of God. Some of you really appreciated some of the content that I included. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to expand on some of those ideas. The idea that God made both men and women in his image. Yesterday I talked about the fact that God made man and woman in his image and his likeness. Image is the Hebrew word tselem, likeness is the Hebrew word demuth. That image is a masculine word, likeness or demuth is a feminine word. And then the next verse, verse 27 of Genesis chapter 1, says that God made man and woman in his image. Male and female, he created them. Both men and women are created equal before God. Man is not somehow in a special position before God, that both were made to reflect God's goodness, God's character to the rest of creation. And in Genesis chapter 2, when God made women, it says that God made the man to fall into a deep sleep, and that God took one of his ribs and closed the flesh at that place. And then God made the rib that he had taken from the man into a woman and brought her to the man. Unfortunately, our English translations here don't do a great job at translating this word that commonly gets translated as rib. Scholars are in agreement that a better translation would be that God took a side from Adam, that God split Adam in half. It's this idea of like a side of beef, that it was a half of Adam that God chose to make woman out of. That woman was made to be a helper for man, to do things for man that man cannot do for himself, and vice versa. That again, man is not somehow better than woman, and women are not somehow better than man. But so often this verse gets used to justify mistreatment of women, and along with the next chapter, when sin enters the world, that it was Eve who sinned first, that caused Adam to sin, and therefore it's women's fault. And so we can justify mistreatment or domineering of women, but the way that God set up creation to work, we're not called to live out of a sinful state, but what we were supposed to be, the ideal humanity. And Jesus said that if you would want to rule, you must serve. You must become the least of these. You must serve one another. The Apostle Paul would talk about this in his letter to the church at Ephesus in Ephesians chapter 5. We're commonly told, wives, submit to your husbands as unto the Lord, and husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church. Well, Christ died for the church. But the very next, the verse that comes before this is commonly left out. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 20, we read, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. That both husbands and wives are supposed to submit to one another. That it's not only wives who are supposed to submit, but husbands unto their wives and wives unto their husbands, because they're both submitting to the Lord. It's a submission competition between the two of them. And so that's the picture that we get of what man and women are supposed to do, is to submit to one another as unto the Lord. That it's not men domineer over your wife, but rather submit to one another as unto the Lord. And husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church and laid his life down for her. That's the picture that we get in the early chapters of Genesis before sin enters the world, and that's the picture that we see living out under the gospel, under the good news of King Jesus. Well, hey, if you like what you heard and you found it helpful, why don't you go ahead and watch the complete message video, found the link right here. And don't forget to subscribe to make sure that you don't miss a thing.